Hello, Garland Nixon here. It's Tuesday night, 9:30, and Caleb Maupin and I are hanging out. Look, I got my CPI shirt on. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Caleb Maupin on a Tuesday night. And as most people know, that when I have guests on, if they've got a website or anything, we always start off by showing that. And this is the good work done by Caleb, the Center for Political Innovation. Look at that. Peace with Russia, peace with China, no World War III, no police state. We need a government of action to fight for working families. How about that? They got news, they got upcoming events, all kind of stuff going on. Wow. Suspended on blue sky for opposing terrorism. How about that? Fighting imperialism. So they got all kinds of stuff. Look at this. Talk to Yemen. Stop the bombing. Good stuff going on there. That's CPIUSA.org. Make sure you check that website out so you'll find all of the fine works that Caleb and his crew are up to and the events that they got coming. All right, Caleb. Now, for those of you who may not know, to talk about the Middle East, to me, Caleb is one of the most knowledgeable people I know for two reasons. Number one, he literally wrote the book on Yemen. And I mean, literally wrote a book on Yemen. Number one, who are the Houthis? Who are the Houthis? The Houthis. And what are they fighting for? I got my Y and my H. Who are the Houthis? What are they fighting for? That's Caleb Maupin. You can find that. Number two, he's been to Iran on more than one occasion, and he knows them both well. So let's get started with the Houthis. Now, let me ask you this. I've been watching Pepe Escobar recently. He's been on Danny Haifong and other places talking about Ansar Allah, about Yemen. For people who don't understand who they are, number one, and as you said, what they're fighting for. Why are they involved in this fight? Why are they so engaged? Why are they basically saying, look, we'll never back down. This is our duty. What do we need to know about the Houthis?
Well, the most important thing to know about the Houthis that they're not going to tell you on television, and it's not obvious on the surface, but it is made clear in my book, is that they are an anti-imperialist movement that is demanding economic development and fighting against cuts in public services. And that's why they were formed. Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the world. And it started out as a religious youth group called Young Believers that was providing medical care and providing summer camps and education. And then from there, it became a full-edged political movement that was demanding the economic development of Yemen. They want to utilize the vast oil resources of Yemen, which are untapped, which are in the ground. And they've talked about how Yemen has vast arable land. They could become a farming country, but they import all their food from Turkey and the United States and other countries. And they are fighting to take control of their country and its natural resources. And they look to Iran as a great example, but a big source of inspiration for them was Venezuela. Right after they seized control of the capital in 2015, BBC was interviewing them. They said, are you an Iranian-inspired movement? They said, yeah, we're inspired by Iran. But we're also inspired by Venezuela and Hugo Chavez, and we support the oppressed everywhere in the world. And they are a very religious fighting force that it's the center of what they call the Revolutionary Committee that has a number of different groups in it, Arab nationalists, socialists, and communists, as well as other forces. And they are dedicated to breaking Yemen out of the domination of Saudi Arabia and out of the domination of foreign countries. And they have proved themselves on the battlefield. And at this point, the overwhelming majority of the population of Yemen lives in territory that is under the control of the Houthis. There's parts of Yemen that are under the control of a Saudi-backed force, but it's very low percentage of the population is under their control. They are the future of Yemen. But they don't seek to impose their religion on all of Yemen. They are Shia Muslims, Zaydis, and they're only about 35% of the population has their religion. So they would like to create autonomy so that people in Yemen can have their own religious beliefs locally. But they are from the tradition of the Islamic Revolution, of the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution. They're inspired by Che Guevara and a lot of anti-colonial struggles. And they are now capturing the energy of the whole world by fighting for the Palestinians. And there's a lot that can be learned by studying the history of the Houthi movement. Ansar Allah, supporters of God, is what their name is. Houthi is kind of an ethnic term. It means they're calling them hillbillies, basically. It's a last name. When I was a kid in Ohio, Amish people, there were a lot of Amish people in the area. And Amish people aren't allowed to drive, but they can ride in a van. And so, if you got a van, that was how some people I knew made money in high school, is they rented or bought a van, and they would drive Amish people. And so when you rented a van to drive Amish people, they called it a Yoder toter, because Yoder was a common last name among Amish people. Well, when they call them Houthis, they're saying they're a bunch of people from the mountains that have this common last name, Houthi, which is a last name. But now they wear it with pride. It started out as kind of a derogatory name. They're calling them mountain people, but their founder, whose last name was Houthi, Hussein al-Houthi, he was martyred, and from then on they wore the name Houthi with pride, because that's who they're named after. Their religious leader, the very charismatic Hussein al-Houthi, he died. It's his brother, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, who is the leader now, and they wear the name with pride. But it started out as kind of a slur on them, kind of a last name kind of thing. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I know some people from the region who had told me, like I've got the big I should show it. It's in the other room. The big thing that they wear on their head that they wrap, the whatever you call it, but they wrap it a certain way on their head. A friend of mine brought me one from Yemen. I actually have one in the other room. Yeah, I've got one of those. And he said, it told me, you should go online and figure out how to wear it and wear it on one of your YouTubes. And I'm like, yeah, Yemen. I mean, they throw me off immediately if they saw, oh, there he is. He's a terrorist supporter. I'm out of here. But at any rate, I had heard that they had support from North Korea. I have heard that they've gotten support from Iran. I also have heard that they have a lot of indigenous abilities and technical abilities, but that their engineers had been, shall we say, influenced by Russian and Iranian and even Chinese engineers. What are your thoughts on the amazing technological advances that have been made by Ansar Allah in a small and very poor country?
Well, there's a couple layers to this. The first thing to point out when it comes to foreign support is that if they didn't have a massive amount of support on the ground, this war, the fighting would have been over in a week, maybe a month, maybe a year. But they've really been waging armed struggle in Yemen since 2003. And they've been fighting this entire time, and they've been gaining strength and influence. And at this point, they are the government of Yemen. So if they were all just a bunch of foreign agents and stooges, which is the neocon line, right? The neocon narrative is, this is just Iranian expansion. This is Iran trying to take over Yemen. Well, if that was the case, this war would have been over very, very quickly. There's a huge amount of support for the Houthis, and they've been very strategic, and they've made a lot of alliances with different communities, and they've done a lot of different things that have been able to gain, support. During the Arab Spring protests, they were against the corrupt president of the country. And when all these other people were out there protesting because of Facebook and Twitter and against the corrupt president, the police would come and beat them up or whatever. They provided security to protect the protesters, and they had their militias protect the protesters from the police, and that made them quite popular. And they have a history of doing things like that make them very popular with people who might not agree with them for religious or tribal or ideological reasons. But as far as foreign support, it's interesting because they are an anti-imperialist movement. They do very much align themselves with Russia and China and with Iran and with Cuba and Venezuela, etc. But Russia and China have to be careful, right? Russia and China have made clear they don't approve of what the Houthis are doing because they're stopping ships, and if Russia and China are to double down and say, all right, we support the Houthis stopping ships, at that point, the USA says, oh, okay, so then I guess it's open season on your ships, and all the treaties that we have protecting, maritime, they're all null and void at that point. And obviously that can't be the case, and that's why, for example, Russia and China cooperate with the sanctions on North Korea for pulling out of the non-proliferation treaty and developing nuclear weapons. Russia and China might support North Korea, might even understand why North Korea feels they have to get nuclear weapons. But there's also the non-proliferation treaty. And if that treaty goes away, then the USA gives all of its friends nuclear weapons. They have to give all their friends nuclear weapons, and we're in a world of hurt. So, there are international norms and precedents. But when it really comes down to it, the Houthis are really an inspiration to the entire world, and many people see them as enforcing international law. I mean, it's basically a picket line in the Red Sea. They say, stop bombing Gaza and we'll stop stopping ships. But if you keep bombing Gaza, we're going to stop ships in the Red Sea. And when that ceasefire happened, the Houthis recognized it and they stopped messing with ships. While that ceasefire was intact during Trump's first 30 days in office or so, they did not attack ships. And then when Israel broke the ceasefire, killed 400 people in a day, very horrendous, then they started blocking ships. And I mean, it's a picket line, right? I mean, if a business is on strike, you set up a picket line out front and you try to block people from going in. That's illegal. What the Houthis are doing is illegal. I mean, you can't legally stop ships, but also the International Criminal Court says what Israel's doing is also illegal, and no one's trying to stop Israel. So there's a lot of illegal stuff going on. How do they say? All's not fair in love and war. And this is a situation where Palestinians have been dying around the clock, and this is a country that feels it is their religious obligation to stand with the Palestinians. Their founder, Hussein al-Houthi, told them, and I quote in the book, his very sermon, he said to them, there would come a time when there would be a situation where Yemen would be able to stand with the Palestinians in a way no other country could. And they see this as prophecy fulfilled. This is their mission being fulfilled. I will emphasize, Shia Islam in particular. You have Sunnis and Shias, and there are different types of Shia Muslims, but Shia Islam in particular really emphasizes martyrdom. The idea that if you die, you die for God, that is the highest honor. Now, I point out, and I quote in the book, Jesus Christ in the Christian Bible said the same thing many times, right? He said, whoever gains his life shall lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake shall gain it. Who's not willing to pick up his cross and lay down his life is not worthy of me. It's all over the Christian Bible, but it's just not emphasized as much in the Christian tradition. Whereas in Shia Islam, it is emphasized. Sunni and Shia Islam, the divide goes back to after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. There were some who wanted to continue his lineage and have imams that would continue his lineage. And there were some that wanted to have kind of an elected government. Now, the people who wanted the elected government were the capitalists, the merchants, because they had the most money and they would win the elections. And so the successors, the imams that followed the Prophet Muhammad, they were populists, and they built up kind of mass movements of poor people to fight for their rights. Imam Ali, he said that he has never seen great wealth without great violation of rights all around it, for example, right? And that Shia Islam really emphasizes standing with the oppressed. And the imams led various uprisings against the merchants that were emerging in the Arab world after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And many of the imams were killed. Imam Ali was stabbed while he was praying in a mosque. Imam Hussein was killed at the Battle of Karbala in Iraq. And that these imams, a lot of them were martyred. They were killed for fighting for what Shia Islam refers to as the oppressed, which is the people that are being oppressed by tyrants and exploiters. And so Shia Islam has this kind of populist, anti-capitalist, socialistic edge. On top of that, right? The 1979 revolution of Iran, that was a Shia Islamic revolution. That was, Ayatollah Khomeini, who's a Shia Muslim, became the leader of Iran. And that took place at 1979 when communism and anti-colonial struggles were on the rise all around the world. So Shia Islam in Iran was very much influenced by the wave of national liberation struggles. And so the socialistic and anti-imperialist, anti-colonial aspects that were already there in the religion got really amped up. And now that Iran is like the main Shia country in the world, Shia Islam just has this very, very revolutionary edge to it. And the Houthis are an expression of that, no question about it. When I was in Iran, I found out that when they opened up a British embassy in Iran, they insisted on putting it on Bobby Sands Street. And Bobby Sands is a martyr of the IRA. He was the hunger strike IRA fighter who was on hunger strike in the early 80s and died, right? And so the British embassy, it says on all their mail, Bobby Sands Street, as a way to, stick it to the British. There are big murals of Malcolm X that you will see in Iran. He's very much looked up to and admired. And there are whole like buildings where they study. I believe there's a building in Iran called the House of Latin America that facilitates. It was set up by Iranian President Ahmadinejad to facilitate their trade, their relations with Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela. And the whole building is, it's got the writings of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and it's just a whole beautiful building set up to facilitate their relationship with Bolivarian countries. And Ahmadinejad, I think he said that he thought Fidel Castro was one of the greatest Muslims who's ever lived. Well, Fidel Castro never expressed the Islamic faith, but when Ahmadinejad said that, he was kind of making a point that like he sees his religious beliefs as being part of like a global anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolution, right? So the slogan that the Iranian government, what they used when they came to power in 1979, they said, "Not capitalism, but Islam." Not capitalism, but Islam. And they refer to their economic system as the resistance economy. But it's largely a state-run economy. The main natural resource is oil, and the oil is under the hands of the state. The oil, revenue goes into the state. The state uses that to subsidize businesses. They've got state-run power plants. They've got state-run hospitals and a state-run healthcare service. They've got, car companies and steel manufacturing. The biggest economic entity in Iran is the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, which is this military organization that is above the elected government. It's accountable only to the supreme leader, the leader of the revolution. And they are the biggest economic entity. They own businesses and factories, and they build bridges across the country. They mobilize to construct the infrastructure of the country and such. They have the most money of anything in the country. So, you look at the Islamic Revolution, it is very much an anti-capitalist, anti-colonial revolution. The Houthis look to it for inspiration. Hezbollah is very much an outgrowth of the Shia Islamic Revolution as well. And there's other movements, in Bahrain, for example. Bahrain is a country that the majority are Shia Muslims, but Saudi Arabia has imposed a government on them that is a monarchy. It's a dictatorship that is run by a Sunni and who's appointed by Saudi Arabia. And many times Saudi Arabia has invaded Bahrain to impose this government. Well, the resistance to the Saudi-backed government of Bahrain is Shia Muslims. There's a lot of Pakistani Shia Muslim resistance groups. Iraq is a majority Shia country, and a lot of the various fighting forces in the country that fought against ISIS were armed by Iran and supported by Iran. So Shia Islam is one particular, force. They call themselves the axis of resistance. I guess after Bush talked about the axis of evil, he talked about Iran being the axis of evil along with Iraq and North Korea. Hezbollah and Iran's, more radical leaders, they said, well, we're not the axis of evil, we're the axis of resistance. And so that's kind of what they call themselves. And they are the main anti-imperialist force in the Middle East at this time. And Barack Obama very much employed a strategy of trying to polarize the Muslims of the world, Sunni versus Shia, and play up the idea that Iran is trying to take over the world with Shia Islam. And they emphasized like Bashar Assad in Syria was like, he's a certain type of Shia. He's an Alawite. And they tried to make it seem like, Shia Islam is a big conspiracy from Iran to take over the world. That was a big part of Saudi propaganda during the Obama years. And during the Arab Spring, the Muslim Brotherhood, they were being supported by Al Jazeera and other things. They were leading a lot of the protests. And they were pushing this message of, well, stay away from Iran, stay away from the Shia Muslims. They're trying to take over the Middle East. It's a plot by Iran to take over the world with their ideology or whatnot. But that strategy has completely failed because of what Israel's doing. Because now Israel is bombing Gaza, and the main people fighting them are the Houthis that are Shia Muslims. But also, Israel has made it abundantly clear its main enemy is Iran, and Iran is Shia Muslim. Hezbollah is also one of their main battlefield enemies, and they're Shia. And so the idea that, playing Sunni Muslims against Shia Muslims, and I think even Trump did that during his first term. He tried to build an Arab NATO against Iran. It's all just fallen apart. And at this point, the Muslim world is pretty united in its contempt for Israel and their atrocities. And the Houthis are very much the heroes. And Iran is seen as a country where this revolutionary force that is Israel's main enemy in the region has taken power. So, things have really turned against what the United States was pushing for in the last decade or so.
Let me ask you this. The Ba'ath Party, spelled with two A's, Baath, that I know allegedly Saddam Hussein was a Ba'ath Partyist. The Ba'ath Party seems to me to some extent. It has some roots in socialism.
Yeah.
I don't understand some of the Ba'ath Party elements have been infiltrated by Western intelligence. Who are the Ba'ath Party? What do we need to know about them?
Okay, so the Ba'ath Party started in Syria during the lead up to World War II. You had the Syrian Communist Party, which was just a group of Syrians who believed in communism, looked to the Soviet Union for inspiration. But the Western world at that point was being divided between the people that were aligned with Hitler and the Nazis and the people that were aligned with Britain and America. And the Soviet Union thought Hitler was the main danger. So they oriented people in countries that were colonized by countries that were against Hitler to not resist colonialism. And Syria was colonized by France. And, you know, if the Syrian Arab people, they were being oppressed by the French, but the Communist Party said, lay off the French, just focus on anti-fascism right now. So there was a guy in the Syrian Communist Party who was a proud Arab nationalist. He was actually from a Christian background, but he was a communist atheist. And his name was Michel Aflaq. And he was a leader of the Syrian Communist Party. And he said, I'm not going to go along with this. The French are my colonizer. The French are my occupier. So he broke away from the Communist Party and he started his own party called the Ba'athist Arab Socialist Party. And Ba'ath means resurrection or renaissance or rebirth. And it was a socialist party that was for the rebirth of the Arab people. And they were Arab nationalists, meaning they were fighting for the Arabs, right, that are the majority, right? That's different, right? The Iranians are Persians. You also have Kurds, you have Turkmen, you have different ethnicities, but they were for the Arab people. And the goal of the Ba'ath Party was that all of the Arab countries would unite into one country, right? And that they felt that the borders that were drawn in the Sykes-Picot Agreement by the colonizers were not legitimate, and they wanted to unite all the Arab people into one nation. And that was called Ba'athist Arab Socialism. And they wanted a secular government. They considered Islam to be a great aspect of the Arab people, something that showed how brilliant the Arabs were. But they said, if you're a Christian and you're an Arab, that's fine. If you're, if you have another faith, if you're an atheist and you're an Arab, that's fine. They wanted a secular government, and they were focused on Arab socialism. And they studied Marx and they studied Lenin, but they had their own kind of interpretation that was, Arab specific, Arab nationalist. And that's Baathism. And in Iraq, Saddam Hussein was a Baathist, and he ended up taking power. And in Syria, Bashar Assad was a Baathist, and he took power. Syria and Iraq split. And the founder of Baathism ended up moving to Iraq, and he supported Saddam Hussein. And so the Syrian government of Bashar Assad, they kind of argued that Baathism had different roots, and they kind of disavowed Michel Aflaq, the founder, and they pointed to another intellectual they said was the real inspiration of Ba'athist Arab socialism. And all over the Arab world, you have Ba'athist parties. It just means resurrection, rebirth, renaissance, and it's a form of Arab nationalism and socialism. It's not one thing that Zionists will frequently say is they'll say it's Nazi, right? They'll say, well, it's National Socialism, right? They're Arab nationalists and they're socialists. So that's just like Hitler. That's a bunch of malarkey. The Baathists were anti-fascist from the beginning. They viewed Hitler as a great enemy. They viewed Hitler as a colonizer, as German imperialist, and they aligned themselves with communists around the world. They just said, well, we've got our special kind of communism for the Arab world called Baathism. And that's important because a lot of Zionist propaganda really kind of bends over backwards to try and paint all the different Arab groups, the Iranians, the Ba'athist socialists, Hamas, all of them, to paint them as all Nazis. And that's that's Zionist propaganda. And that's how to justify the oppression. But, there've been a lot of various socialist and communist and anti-imperialist movements. The Iranians are definitely not communist or socialist. They view themselves as Islamic revolutionaries. They want a religious government, and they're opposed to any kind of ethnic nationalism. It was the kingdom of Persia for the Persians before the Islamic Revolution. And then after that, it became the Islamic Republic of Iran, and racism became illegal, and it was for all the people there, right? And you have Persians in Iran, but you also have Kurds, you also have Arabs, you also have Turkmen, and the idea is this government's for everybody, and it's an Islamic government because the Prophet came for all mankind, etc., right? And so they're rejecting any form of nationalism, but it's a religious government, whereas the Ba'athist Arab socialists, they are for the Arab people, and they reject any kind of religious government. They want a secular government. There are these differences, and one thing that's been pointed out is that all over the Middle East, these groups that exist, a lot of them kind of believe the same thing. They believe we should care for the poor and provide services, and we should fight the colonizers and the imperialists. And one way they've kept these countries oppressed is the intelligence agencies of the British and the Americans will infiltrate, and they'll boost one against the other, etc. And, you have Nasser. Abdel Nasser was the leader of Egypt. He wasn't a Ba'athist, but he called himself just an Arab socialist, right? And then you have the various countries that have communist parties. South Yemen used to be, Yemen used to be divided between North and South Yemen, and South Yemen was run by the Communist Party. It was a Marxist-Leninist government. And that these groups that kind of all believe the same thing, which is we're trying to fight the colonizer and the occupier. We want an economy where people are cared for, playing them against each other, right? And dividing them and utilizing ethnic and tribal divisions to amplify that is a really big part of it. When the USA invaded Iraq, for example, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni, but the majority of Iraqis are Shia. And they really tried to play that up and be like, oh, well, now's the time for the Shia to get their revenge on Saddam Hussein. And there were many Iraqis that said, look, we didn't even keep track of who was Sunni and Shia before the USA invaded. But when the USA invaded Iraq, everyone's ID said what their ethnicity was on it, Kurd, Sunni, Shia, and they started giving government jobs out based on that as a way of creating division and intensifying division in the country. So that's the important thing to keep in mind there. The other thing is that oil is a very, very important, commodity on the global economy. And the Middle East has got a lot of it, right? And, Libya under Gaddafi and Iran and Iraq, and there's a lot of oil in that region. And in the 70s, you had the OPEC boycott, where the Arab countries basically demanded they get paid a decent amount for that oil, and oil prices went up, and there was a lot of wealth coming into the region, and that created the basis for, with that amount of wealth, you could, really build a lot of infrastructure. But it also became very important for the imperialists to try and control that region and get control of the profits. So it's important to keep all of that in mind when we think about all of this.
Very interesting. And I also understand the largest Jewish population outside of Israel in the Middle East is in Iran.
Yeah. And I went to a synagogue in Mashhad in Iran, and I saw a synagogue openly operating. You can be Jewish in Iran. You can practice your religion. You just cannot, you absolutely cannot support Israel. If you support Israel in any way, you're going to jail. If you visit Israel, you're going to jail if you come back to Iran. They are very, very anti-Israel. They consider Israel to be, very much an existential threat. They consider Israel to be oppressing the Palestinians, a racist state, etc. But there are a number of Jews in Iran. There are Jewish members of the Iranian parliament, and they practice their religion, and they have kosher butcher shops, and they have neighborhoods, and they exist, and they do their own thing, but they are separate from Israel. And it's interesting because you'll often read accounts of like Christians being persecuted in Iran as well. They talk about Jews being persecuted in Iran. Well, they're not being persecuted for being Jews. They're being persecuted if they're supporting Israel. And the same for, Christians, right? I went to church at an Armenian Orthodox church on Sunday morning in Tehran, and they actually have it set up. They have a big wall around the church, and within the church, women don't have to keep their head covered up, and you can have alcohol, communion wine, and so there's alcohol inside, and basically all the religious laws of Iran do not apply inside of the church facility. They have a big wall around it, so you can just do whatever you want in there. And they exist, and there's Catholic churches in Iran and all of that. You just can't be supporting Israel. And there are a lot of Christian churches that supporting Israel is part of their faith. And so, you'll get somebody, there's a lot of Americans that have dual citizenship with Iran, especially in Southern California. You'll get some Iranian who, converts to being a fundamental Baptist or being a Presbyterian or something like that. And then he goes back to Iran and starts handing out pamphlets or something about how Israel has a right to exist. Well, they're going to throw him in jail for that because you can't support Israel. They consider Israel to be their enemy. They consider themselves to be at war with Israel. But he's not being thrown in jail for being a Christian. He's being thrown in jail for supporting Israel, for propagating for their enemy. So that's the important thing to keep in mind about that. And that applies to the Jewish community there as well. So, I mean, it's interesting. And there are a lot of Jews in Iran. And I mean, they exist and they're there. And that's something that Israel would like to obscure and would not like the world to know about.
What do you think about what's going on with the U.S., and Iran, threatening Iran? Certainly, I all along for a while, there were a lot of people that, felt, okay, they'll definitely do it. Some people said they won't do it. And I was on the fence. I felt like it's most likely that they won't. I felt it's most likely that the U.S. wouldn't just come out and attack Iran because Iran's a very, very strong military power and has the capability to be, like frank, end U.S. hegemony. You know, if they were to take the advantage of the full spectrum of retaliatory abilities that they have, they could. Let's face it, if you don't have an economy, you're not much of a world power, and they could wipe out, if they wanted, they could wipe out the U.S. Economy by A, restricting oil through the Straits of Hormuz, B, potentially, we would hope they wouldn't, but potentially attacking infrastructure in the region. So they could destroy U.S. bases. They have military power. They have Russia and China as a support, which no doubt helps them with, you know, military hardware, military technology, ISR, etc. So my point being, I felt that the price was too high. Now, I'm not saying that the U.S. definitely won't do it, but your thoughts on the argument, the discussions being had about the U.S. potentially attacking Iran, and about what's going on with the coming conversation that the U.S. is going to have with Iran. Because as you know, I'll just end up by saying this, because I'll throw the whole thing at you at once and let you go wherever you want to be, because a part of the discussion is the U.S. is asking for things that Iran will never get. Anyway, your thoughts on this whole concept?
Well, as far as attacking Iran, the USA can beat its chest and claim it's going to do that. But I feel like if they had the ability to do that and not face some kind of very severe retaliation, it would have already happened. You know, because we've seen Israel very much push the limit with carrying out assassinations in Iran and against Iranian consulates and such. And I think the USA, if they could just strike Iran, they would have. And the fact that they haven't, you know, that says a lot. You know, they murdered Qasem Soleimani. And if we want to see progress between the USA and Iran, Donald Trump needs to apologize for that. All right. And if he can just say, look, I was misled. I didn't understand who he was. You know, my advisors who are no longer in my administration, you know, Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, they told me that this guy killed a bunch of U.S. troops. That wasn't true. If Trump can say that, that'll make it much easier for the Islamic Republic to sit down with him. Right. But right now, Trump is the guy who killed the national celebrity, the national hero of the country. Right. I mean, this guy was the most famous figure. He was like, imagine like a combination between like, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and also, Taylor Swift, right? That's what this guy was. He was a celebrity and like a national patriotic hero. And when Trump killed him in a very cowardly way, this guy was lured to Iraq to peace talks. He did the peace talks. And as he was going to the airport, he was killed with a drone. At that point, it's going to be very, very hard for the Islamic Republic, the government, to say, all right, now we're going to sit down and give concessions to the guy who did that. So if Trump could say, you know what, I was wrong to do that, and give a at least somewhat mildly sincere apology for that, that would really help things. But I'll say this, having been, in Iran is about a third. And this is why a direct invasion or a war with Iran is not going to happen. All right. So in Iran, there's a layer of people, and I've been to the neighborhoods in northern Tehran, and those people wear blue jeans, and they all drive BMWs, which is the only foreign car you can get in Iran. It's from Germany. It's a BMW. And it costs 400%, 4 times what it would normally cost because of the sanctions. But they drive BMWs, and they have these restaurants that look just like McDonald's and have golden arches on them. And they watch American satellite broadcasts. And yeah, those people in northern Iran, northern Tehran, yeah, they hate the government. They're very wealthy. They love America. They love American imperialism. And, sure, that's a layer of people, right? Now, whether or not they're going to go out and fight for it, they all remember the revolution and how traumatizing it was. And they all had relatives who got, killed during the revolution. And so there's a lot of feeling like we don't want another revolution. We don't want another civil war, but they really don't like the government. Then you have a third of the country that are, lukewarm toward the government. They're not fanatical Muslims, but they say, they built the highways, they built the bridges, they're fighting Israel. Israel's an aggressor. Maybe I don't agree with everything they say. Maybe they're a little bit fanatical, but you know what? Okay, fine, whatever. They're they're sympathetic to the government somewhat, but they're not all on board, right? And they might, they might have a VPN on their computer and look at websites they're not supposed to look at, or watch Western TV and compare it to Iranian TV or whatever. That's a third. And then you have 1/3 of the country that are ready to die for the revolution, right? And you go to certain neighborhoods where the women, they wear their faces covered, but everything else is all black, right? And you have these things called the Basij councils that they have. Every neighborhood in Iran has what's called a Basij council, which means the mobilized oppressed, which is like the community organization. And they're the ones that go around the community enforcing the religious laws, right? And that, they're walking the streets, making sure the women are wearing headscarves, and they're knocking on their neighbors' doors to say, hey, we're raising money for Yemen, or we're doing this, or are you going to the Friday prayer? And they are in the community enforcing the goals of the revolution. They are listening to the broadcast of the supreme leader, and they're making sure everybody else is, and that there's 1/3 of the country that they are ready to, that from the time they have been children, they are ready to die for the Islamic Revolution. And there's the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, which is the paramilitary, it's like additional to the Iranian military that is loyal only to the supreme leader himself. And those folks, they are all in. And they are ready to be martyrs if they have to. They have got guns in their homes. They've got, weapons, and they are ready to fight for it. And that, when you have 1/3 like that is just, when 1/3 of the country is ready to fight and die for the revolution, you're not going to have a cakewalk situation, right? When the USA invaded Iraq is much smaller than Iran. And the Iraqi government, there'd been years of sanctions, and there was kind of corruption had set in, and there were big problems. And, it was a very different situation. That's not the situation in Iran. In Iran, you have a layer of people that are very, very loyal to the government. You have organizations in every community. You have the country is basically locked and loaded. They've been anticipating some kind of war since the revolution. They were invaded by Iraq, and for 10 years, they battled the Iraqi invaders, and they fought the Iraqi invaders. They are ready to fight. And so because of that, the USA invading Iran is just, it's not going to happen. They would fight them. Right. And that even beyond that 1/3 of people that are loyal to the Islamic Revolution and its ideology, there's a lot of people that really hate the United States because of the Shah. And there's just a feeling that culturally that they have to oppose Israel, and that, the USA is a funder and supporter of Israel, and they see the crimes that are being committed against the Palestinian people. And, the idea that some country that's doing and backing what Israel's doing is going to be a liberator or something, they're not going to buy it. Right. And so Iran is ready to fight. Iran is solid, and Iran is very much a bastion of anti-imperialism. And I do want to mention this because Iran has it's not always been that way. So, at the time the Islamic Revolution happened, Khomeini was not a communist, right? Khomeini made that very, very clear. And, there were a number of communist groups in Iran, and they didn't come to power. And the reason they didn't come to power is because they all had kind of discredited themselves as collaborators. For example, during World War II, the Communist Party of Iran supported the British invading Iran because the Iranian, monarch was sympathizing with Hitler. And so that, to a lot of Iranians, they said, okay, these communists, they're supposed to be fighting against imperialism, but they supported the British. They didn't want to hear it. China, the government of China under Mao, they took the position that the Soviet Union was the main danger. And so China under Mao embraced the Shah, and the Shah was brought to Iran, and the Shah's wife was taken around. And so China was like collaborating with the corrupt US-backed dictatorship. And a lot of the communist groups in Iran, they had kind of lost their credibility. Whereas Khomeini, he was not a political leader. He was a religious leader, and he was a religious leader in the country. And when they started kind of secularizing the country in the 1960s, he spoke up against the US-backed dictator who was secularizing the country, and he fled the country. And then they would sneak his sermons back to the country in audio cassettes, and people would listen to them. And he was just this fanatical conservative preacher who never once collaborated with the imperialists. He always said that the Western imperialists were the enemy. He always said we want to preserve our ideology. And he had the credibility. The communists didn't. He had that credibility, as he was always anti-colonial, always anti-imperialist. So they took power. And when Khomeini took power, Iraq invaded Iran. And Iraq was a Ba'athist Arab socialism. Saddam Hussein aligned with the Soviet Union. So there was very much a feeling that, this is a communist aligned government that's attacking us. There was a big crackdown on communist groups. And then as, at the beginning of the war, the USA was supporting Iraq against Iran. But then later throughout the war, the USA started to see Saddam Hussein as the main threat and started backing Iran. And there was Iran-Contra, where Reagan gave weapons and missiles, and there was the arms for hostages thing and all of that. So in the late 80s, Iran kind of started pivoting in a less anti-imperialist direction. And they executed a lot of the communist prisoners. There was like a mass execution in 1988 where they executed thousands of communist prisoners. And they started having a lot of market liberalization and reforms. And in the 90s, Iran was kind of pivoting in a pro-US direction because Iraq was their main enemy, and that was Saddam Hussein. But all of that changed because of the axis of evil speech. And all of that also changed because the oil prices went up. After the USA invaded Iraq, Bush called, Iran, Iraq, and North Korea the axis of evil. So Iran's like, hey, we're trying to help you fight Iraq, and you're calling us the axis of evil. And Qasem Soleimani actually was involved in helping the USA in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan borders, and Iran thought, hey, we're cooperating with this war on terror, whatever. And then you call us the axis of evil. And then when Bush invaded Iraq, the oil prices shot up. And when the oil prices went up to like $120 a barrel, which is like the highest oil prices in history at that point, all of that money went into the government sector of the Iranian economy. And that government sector, that's where the hardliners are. And so because the USA had kind of stabbed Iran in the back and was calling them the axis of evil when they were trying to cooperate on the war on terror. And then on top of that, because the oil prices were very high, you then had Ahmadinejad get elected. And Ahmadinejad was the first president they'd ever had who was not a cleric, and he had no beard. And that's an important thing, right? The various presidents that have come after him and before him all have big, huge beards to show how religious they are. Well, Ahmadinejad, he came into office and he was clean shaven. And he was from a political party where he recognized the Islamic constitution, but he was not a cleric. He was, a guy, he was an engineer by background. He worked in architecting and engineering and stuff like that. And he came into office, and he was the first president they never had who was not a cleric. And he started pivoting Iran in kind of a socialistic direction. And there were a lot of communists from around the world that had, kind of got the memo that they could go back to Iran. There were a lot of communists who fled Iran at the time of the Islamic Revolution and moved to different parts of the world. And when Ahmadinejad came into office, a lot of them got the memo, you can come home now. You won't be arrested or whatever. And Iran got very close to Venezuela and Hugo Chavez, very close to Cuba. And Iran really pivoted in a revolutionary direction. And then the big turning point was 2006. When Israel invaded Lebanon and Hezbollah kicked Israel's ass, right? You remember that, right? Israel went into Lebanon and they didn't know what hit them. I mean, Hezbollah was locked and loaded, and nobody expected that Hezbollah would just pummel Israel, right? In 2006. And it was Israel just experienced an epic defeat when they invaded Lebanon in 2006. And at that point, the entire Muslim world was cheering for Hezbollah, which is this Iranian-aligned Shia Muslim group. And at that point, Iran was very much solidly in an anti-imperialist direction. And now it seems that the anti-imperialist, anti-colonial faction in Iran is very solidly in power. They had an election after Ahmadinejad. You had the election of Rouhani, and Rouhani. Was this reformist. His whole platform is, well, I'm going to get along with America. I'm going to do the Iran nuclear deal. I'm going to get along with America. Ahmadinejad's this crazy anti-imperialist, but I'm going to get along with America. And he signed the Iran nuclear deal, and the USA ripped it up and then murdered Qasem Soleimani. And that discredited the moderates and the reformists from then on. And who has been there for Iran this whole time? Russia and China. China arranged for Saudi Arabia to restore diplomatic relations with Iran. And at this point, Iran is very solidly an anti-imperialist country. Whatever, they had kind of a neoliberal pro-Western side that was kind of gaining in the 90s, but that's over. That's gone. I think Iran is very, very solidly in the anti-imperialist camp because of the balance of forces. And it's important to not moralize these things and not make it like, well, this is about being good or bad. It's about the balance of forces. The anti-colonial, anti-imperialist side of the Islamic Revolution has the upper hand at this point and is going to have the upper hand. And what the Houthis are doing is part of that. What Hezbollah is doing is part of that. And the threats from the United States is all part of that. Iran is very solidly an anti-imperialist country at this point.
You know, I think that the Ukraine conflict has created a dynamic wherein there were regions where people had to kind of make a decision. Are they going to be, you know, try to go get along with the empire or go with the U.S. or are they going to go along, you know, support some of the countries and entities that the U.S. doesn't like? You know, that had been regional, and even regional at times. If the U.S. was focused on that area, you had to make a decision, but in another area, you could kind of float. I think the Ukraine conflict created a dynamic, and the Biden administration were pretty clear running around the world telling everybody, are you with us or with the Russians? And we're going to punish you if you're with the Russians or try to overthrow your government. And I think that the Ukraine conflict created a dynamic where it was hard for countries around the world to sit on the fence. And what the U.S. didn't take into account was that there was a history that the Soviet Union had worked in South America. People wonder why. Look at the baseball teams. You'll see people from South America whose names are Vladimir Guerrero, Lenin, all of these names that are associated with Russia. Why? Because Russia was in South America arming the anti-US, you know, what they called the rebels, but they were people who were in their country trying to kick the US, the CIA out. And I think that one of the things that has happened in Africa, in Latin America, et cetera, and increasingly in the Middle East, is that legacy of the Soviet Union's assistance. They were on the side of the African National Congress that was fighting against apartheid. And I think the legacy of Soviet support against the U.S. empire, against the Brits, et cetera, and the imperialists, against France, when native and indigenous people were fighting, you know, to shake out from under the yoke of colonialism. I think that legacy now is, I don't know how to put it, that the Russia is, and even the locals in those regions are hearkening back to that legacy. That's re-arising. That connection between the Russian Federation's history and these other parts of the world in the global South are starting to become quite important. Your thoughts?
Oh, well, yeah, no, the Sahel states, right? I mean, you look at this strong leader we've got in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore. I mean, that guy is, I mean, he's basically, he doesn't call himself a communist. He's a Marxist. He says he's a Marxist, but he's also a Muslim. He was the leader of a Marxist group at the university.
Oh, I didn't know he was a Muslim.
Yeah, but his religion, he practices Islam. You know, you look at him, I mean, he's from the tradition. He honors the great leader of the country, Tomas Sankara, the anti-colonial fighter. And, you know, he at this point, they just churned out their first electric car, the first electric car ever made in Burkina Faso. They just created their own electric car, which is a really big deal for an African country.
Wow.
Yeah, and, you know, they're having an agricultural revolution. I mean, they're just really expanding their agricultural capacity. You can read about that on the CPI website, a great article my friend Penny wrote. And they're just doing some amazing stuff, and they're doing it in alliance with Russia. And, you know, you got these three governments that are aligned with Russia, and they've got, you know, these military juntas that are in power. And, you know, supposedly the French and the United Nations troops were going to fight the jihadists and the extremists, but they weren't doing a very good job at it. And the Russians, they have their Wagner group, and the Russians said, look, we've been fighting jihadists for a while, and, you know, why don't we team up? And so now we have these kind of socialistic and anti-imperialist governments that have emerged in West Africa that are, you know, aligned with Russia. And it's very exciting. It's very, very exciting what's going on. The other thing is that, you know, in Nigeria, one thing that I covered and I noticed when I was in Iran, there were a number of Nigerians that were studying at the universities. They have a special program for Nigerians. And there's a region of Nigeria that is the Shia Muslim region. It's called Zaria. And it's just the region of Nigeria that is Shia Muslim. And, they have a history of kind of, you know, after the Iran nuclear deal, the government of Nigeria attacked that region. And there was like an armed conflict, and they abducted Sheikh Ibrahim Zakzaki, and they held him for, you know, in military detention for quite some time. But there's like a region in Nigeria that is basically aligned with Iran and has a Shia Muslim ideology. There's a lot that that we don't seem to realize. We have it in our head that the whole world is like revolving around the United States, and it's not the case. There's this whole other economy. In the 90s, if the USA wanted to just destroy a country, they could sanction them. And they did it, right? In North Korea, they just tried to wipe them out, and there was mass hunger because the USA, locked them out of the world economy. They couldn't get gasoline, petroleum, right? They couldn't run the tractors to run their farming system, and people starved to death. And Iraq was very devastated by the sanctions, and Cuba really suffered. There wasn't starvation in Cuba, but there was they only had electricity for a few hours every day. It was very bad. But those days are over. Now, if the United States doesn't want to trade with you, all right, you trade with Russia, you trade with China, you trade with Iran, you trade with you trade with Turkey, you trade with other countries. And the USA doesn't have the ability to just cancel countries the way it used to. And the USA continues to think it does. I remember for a while, it hasn't happened as much lately, but for a while, every so often, Iran would send a big boatload of food to Venezuela. And, Anthony Blinken at the State Department or whatever, they would say, they can't do that. So who said they can't do that? You've cut Iran out of the world economy. You cut Venezuela out of the world economy. Venezuela is having food shortages, and Iran has got loads of food. And so Iran, they build a big boat and they fill it up with food, and they set up an Iranian supermarket in Caracas. What are you going to do about it? There's nothing you can do about it, right? And what right do you have to even object? It's kind of an absurd thing. You lock two countries out of the world economy. They're going to trade with each other. It makes perfect sense. And that there is this whole new economy. One thing I have heard is that Trump is trying to figure out how to get the USA into the BRICS. Now, that's one rumor I'm hearing about the talks that were going on in Istanbul. And that's interesting. Because it seems like that's one thing that Trump did speak to, and Tucker Carlson has spoken to this as well, is that the dollar is going to lose its value because all these countries don't have to use it anymore. And there's this whole world economy. And with all these sanctions that we put on countries around the world, a currency becomes more valuable the more people who use it. It loses its value the less people that use it. And the rise of the BRICS economy, pretty soon there's going to be a correction. And the dollar is going to lose its value very dramatically because people aren't using it. So Donald Trump is trying to figure out how they can maneuver a situation where the dollar doesn't lose its value and that this new economy that's rising with the BRICS doesn't completely leave the USA high and dry. And I'll be honest, we have tied ourselves to the British Empire. We have tied ourselves to this Wall Street, London globalist financial system, and it is doomed and it's crashing and burning. And, I'm not thrilled with a lot of things that Trump is doing, but even what Trump said about Canada, right? Think about that. Why is there talk of Canada joining the United States? Well, that's because what is Canada right between? It's between the continental United States and Alaska, right? And the Arctic is becoming increasingly important. And Alaska is very close to Russia. And there's been a plan to build a bridge over the Bering Sea for a long time. And I think Trump, at least some of the people in Trump's cabinet are saying, look, Europe, Britain, France, Germany, that's the past. We need to pivot the United States eastward. We need to pivot towards this new world, and that making Alaska a thriving economy, and Alaska is very underdeveloped. There's a lot of people in Alaska who don't have running water in their homes, right? It's a very underdeveloped part of the United States, but I have a feeling Alaska is going to become very, very important very soon, right? People pay attention to what's going on with the Arctic, pay attention to all of that. And Russia and China and the Belt and Road Initiative and everything going on in the Korean Peninsula and the Pacific, all of that's, we're the United States. We're connected to that as well. And that, we don't have to go down with the so-called collective West. We don't have to go down with NATO. And I think Trump, as the tariff king, as a guy who's, not afraid to offend these European countries, I think some of his advisors are saying, let's hedge our bets. Let's see if we can attach ourselves to the BRICS and the new world economy. And I hope those voices will prevail because they ultimately understand the way the wind is blowing. The West is not the future because imperialism as an economic system is not sustainable. And we've talked about that on here before, about the irrationality of the market and how artificial intelligence is very much making, an economy centered centered around profit, where profits are in command, it's making it not sustainable. Well, they don't have that problem in the East because they have states that manage the economy in order to see growth. And so I think the future of the United States economically is going to be in the East. And at least somebody in the Trump camp seems to realize that on some level.
Yeah, I think interesting what's going to happen with these tariffs. You know, if the Trump team sees this as a sword fight with China, it's going to go really bad for us because China is a very, very powerful economic country. And I think that in the same way that Russia started as early as 2008 preparing for the potential for a conflict in Ukraine, I think China's been preparing a long time. And when I say a long time, our ideas of a long time are far, far different than China's ideas. They've been around for literally thousands of years. So we'll see about that. The last thing I wanted to ask you about was something here, and I'll show you this article. And this will be the end of it.
Sure.
But this is a really weird. U.S. delivers Panama Canal ultimatum to China. But when you read in it, it says the U.S. has vowed to take back the Panama Canal from, look at this, from Chinese influence, and has launched a series of military deployments and joint exercises with Panama to reinforce that commitment. Old bonehead Hegseth is saying they're saying they've got a new U.S. financed dock and at a naval base there. And the facility is a shared commitment to the canal security. China did not build this canal. China doesn't operate this canal. We will not, and China will not weaponize it, right? But here's the thing: together, we will take back the Panama Canal from, quote, China's influence. And it's like influence is a concept. You can't fire a missile at influence. You can't punch influence. Hey, look, there's influence. I'm going to grab influence and I'm going to punch it right in the snoot. So this symbolic crap about we're going to take it from China's influence and we've got military ships all around. Well, it's going to kind of be hard to target influence. China doesn't own the Panama Canal. They have, like, my understanding is they have like contracts to run some of the facilities there. Your thoughts on this silly absurdity, this flexing by Hegseth et al. And, you know, the Trump team? It's absurd to me. But anyway, your thoughts.
Well, there's a couple layers to this. The first thing is that I think many of Trump's supporters are primed to think China is our enemy. We're fighting against China. And if you fight against Chinese influence that is not there, that's a way to say you're fighting China and you're fighting nothing, right? It's, you know, it's something he can do. You know, I mean, you know, Trump doesn't have to actually attack a Chinese target. Trump doesn't have to actually, he can just say, I got him out of the Panama Canal. Well, they were never there to begin with. You know, I mean, it's something he can do. It's performative, which I think a lot of what Trump is doing is very, very performative. I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of things that Trump is doing that are just to get points with his supporters. The other thing, though, is that while China is not really that involved in the Panama Canal, there is talk of a new canal in Nicaragua. Right. And, you know, Nicaragua now recognizes China, withdrew recognition from Taiwan, recognizes the Chinese People's Republic on the mainland. And there is, you know, there has been talk for a long time of a new canal through Nicaragua that would be an alternative to the Panama Canal that would be under Chinese dominion and would be under the dominion of the Sandinistas, the Marxist anti-imperialist government of Nicaragua. And if anything, maybe Trump doesn't want to draw attention to that, but this is a way to threaten Nicaragua, right? To say, you know, look, we're increasing our military force, we're doing this here, and we're not directly saying this is about Nicaragua and their proposed canal, but we're talking about how important the Panama Canal is and how we don't want China to have influence here, and this is a subtle way to threaten Nicaragua. That's another theory that might be what this is about. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of flexing going on. And again, the same way with Iran, I kind of never really thought that Trump would attack Iran. I may be wrong. I think Trump doesn't want a major war. I may be wrong. I don't think he wants a major war against Iran. I don't know about China. that it concerns me, because I know the U.S. ruling elite see China as the threat, and the U.S. ruling elite would, throw a generation of young Americans out there to be destroyed and possibly have a nuclear war. So I don't know what happens there. Hegseth is a lunatic. I just don't think Hegseth is emotionally qualified for the job, to be quite frank. I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, he's running around showing off the latest tattoo. He's doing push-ups with the troops. Dude, you're not supposed to be doing push-ups with the troops. You know what I mean? But again, Hegseth doesn't make the decisions.
I mean, this is a process. I think one of Lenin's books, he talks about pornography took the place of politics. And I think that's kind of, I think back to that debate in 2016 between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump that just looked like a Jerry Springer episode. I was waiting for someone to throw a chair, and that we've gotten to the point where politics is so much a dog and pony show. There's really not serious debate going on. I mean, it's now the Gulf of America instead of the Gulf of Mexico. Oh, you got him, and then there are all those silly protests, hands off this, hands off that, hands off
NATO.
Right. Yeah, that was ridiculous. And I mean, and I see people, people getting angry. I mean, saying things. I mean, it's things that Trump is not doing. I mean, it's like the team sports has gotten so out of control and ridiculous. I will say, one thing I heard people say is, why isn't Russia on the tariffs list? Have you heard this one? Oh, Trump didn't put Russia on the tariffs list. That shows he's working for the Russians. Folks, Russia is the most sanctioned country in the world. Okay, like what are you talking about? Russia's not on the tariff. Yeah, because they've already been sanctioned. Unbelievable. Like, when people say these dumb things, it's like they don't know what they're talking about. But look, we're trying to challenge that. We were in the streets of Chicago this weekend. We're building for what will be the biggest event the Center for Political Innovation has ever done. I know you're going to be there, Garland, and others. And, this is the poster: Working Families First, Defeat the Deep State, a new America, a new world of peace and innovation. So, it's going to be very, very exciting. If you come to one event this year, I tell folks, come to our convention in Chicago. It is going to be really, really dynamic. We got the Midwest Convention Center. I was just there. We're going to have some dance teams from the Russian community. They're going to be performing. That's going to be very, very exciting. There's going to be some other involvement, from different folks. It's going to be really, really different than anything we've done before. We have never done an event this big. That auditorium holds 500 people. We're going to try to get at least 400 people there, which is not going to be an easy feat. But our team in Chicago is working really hard. They're getting those door hanger flyers on doors. They're reaching out to the Muslim community, etc. It is going to be a dynamic event, July 12th in Chicago. So check out the event. It'll be the biggest thing the Center for Political Innovation's ever done. And hey, if you like what Garland and I are saying, consider becoming a member, right? And you can get involved in what we're doing. We have innovation circles in different cities. And, CPI is a group that is very, very dedicated to spreading an anti-imperialist message. When I was out in the streets of Chicago at Millennium Park this weekend, we had our big banner of Trump and Kim shaking hands. And people were walking by and they looked at it and they couldn't figure out, are we on the red team? Are we on the blue team? Well, we're not on either team. We're on the peace team. We're on the Working Families of America team. And that's what was so refreshing about it. And a lot of people, they were walking by, they saw we were doing something political and they wanted to just put us in a box, and they couldn't. And so instead they had to listen to us. And we gave away a lot of books and we gave away a lot of leaflets. And I think we got through to a lot of people because they were so relieved to hear that we're not playing the team sports message. We're talking about how we can fix up our country. We're not just pointing fingers and saying, well, the other guy's bad, or your team's bad. No, your team's bad. We're actually putting forward an economic program to have peace around the world and improve lives in our country. And that's what's urgently needed. There's really no shortcut. We got to build a movement. We got to build an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial movement. And so we're doing it, right? We can't wait for somebody else to do it. We can't wait for some savior to do it for us. We got to do it. So that's what CPI is all about. I hope folks will check us out. This is our convention coming up this summer.
Well, wonderful. It's what I always say about how do you change the world? There's only one way: change yourself. If you want to bring peace to the world, what do you have to do? Number one, you got to be peaceful. You know what I mean? That's it. That's all you can really do. You can say things to other people, but they may not act peaceful. You can be peaceful. And it's exactly what you're saying. If you want to change the world, you got to do the change. You can't sit around and ask somebody else, what can they do? How can they do it? What's your plans? What should I do? You got to do something. You got to act. I study Zen, and Zen is act without thinking. You got to act. Don't stand around and think about it. You guys got a plan. Hey, we're doing something. Oh, yeah, let's do something. But so thanks a lot, Caleb. And you online, where can people find you? YouTube, Twitter, whatever, the X, wherever the heck.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Rumble, I'm on YouTube. You know, I got my own website, calebmaupin.net. I'm part of the Center for Political Innovation. Yeah, always doing different stuff. Was in Chicago this weekend. So yeah, good times. Thank you.
All right. I'm yawning here. It's 10:30, so I'm going to hit the sack soon. It's a long day, but thank you very much, Caleb, and look forward to talking to you soon. Everybody, don't forget, go to cpiusa.org to for more. Follow me. Make sure, look, if you're watching this, you can go to Caleb's channel because it's also running on Caleb's channel. If you'd like to subscribe there, if you're watching on Caleb's channel, make sure you come over here and subscribe so you can get to everything. You can see, you can follow me on Rockfin or Rumble, whatever the case may be, Telegram, so you can find all my stuff. If you can afford to, also my Substack is up. I got a new article out that I just wrote. If you can afford to, you can donate. Where can people donate for you, Caleb?
Yeah, well, hey, you can support me on Patreon. I do have a Patreon. Got a loyal group of people that have signed up on there. So that's one way people can support me. And, you know, I got other ways people, you know, if you sign up on the Rumble, you become a member on the Rumble. There's different ways. So join CPI. That's the main thing. Become a member of the Center for Political Innovation. Even if you're not able to ever come to a meeting, just become a member. It's making a statement, and it also enables us to put on big events and stuff like that. So it's $15 a month to be a member of CPI. And we've got members all across the country, all different ages, all different backgrounds, all different regions of the United States. So yeah, become a member of CPI.
All right. Thanks very much, Caleb Maupin. And we will be on every week. I don't know about next week. I may be traveling, but we may be able to find a way to pull it off anyway. All right. Thanks a lot. Everybody, follow CPI USA, follow Caleb Maupin, subscribe here, subscribe to his channel. And most importantly, share this on all your social media